Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast. It is Monday, January 29th. And folks, we are coming off a very busy weekend, number one, in the Middle East, and a very busy day in the region. The big headline today, Israel reportedly carrying out airstrikes just south of the Syrian capital of Damascus and eliminating several Iranian advisors in the Syrian capital. Now, that's the big news today. We'll dig into that more. And are we on a direct collision course between Israel and Iran? Plus, yesterday, of course, January 28th, we had that major strike against U.S. soldiers along the Jordan-Syrian border. On the Jordanian side of that border, 3 U.S. soldiers killed by an Iranian-backed drone strike. One of those Iranian militias operating in Iraq, Syria, launched this drone. It struck a U.S. base and killed 3 U.S. soldiers. Folks, a very, very grave and serious escalation by the Iranian regime. The big question now, how will the Biden administration respond? And I'll just throw the question out to you right away. We've got a very active chat. We'll have thousands with us by the time we are done on this live stream. Just throwing the question out there right away from the top. How do you think the Biden administration will respond? Or more specifically, let's not even talk about tactically what they'll do. More specifically, do you think the Biden administration is prepared to respond with any sort of meaningful force? Key point there, key word, meaningful force that will truly put a scare into and send a message to the Iranian regime and implore the regime to back off and stop with the attacks. Do you have any confidence that the Biden administration is prepared to take such steps to really send a message to the Iranian regime? I am very sad to say this, but personally, I do not feel that this administration will do what needs to be done to truly deter the Iranian regime so that, again, these proxy attacks against U.S. soldiers in the region stop. I think back to January 2020, over 4 years ago, just over January 3rd, 2020, when the former administration, the Trump administration, eliminated terror master Qasem Soleimani, arguably the second most powerful man in Iran next to the supreme leader at the time of his death. Now, that was a message. And by the way, in that same strike, this often goes unmentioned, but in that same strike that eliminated Qasem Soleimani, the head of all Iranian-backed militias in Iraq was also killed. So it was a double message sent to the regime and its proxies. Now, that was a truly meaningful show of force and a meaningful message that was heard loud and clear by the Iranian regime. I'm not so sure that the current administration is willing to go even a fraction of that far in its response, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to break it down real quick before we get started. 2 things. Number one, if you have not subscribed to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube, hey, folks, be sure to subscribe, click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. We are fast approaching 1 million subscribers here. Hard to believe as we move into 2024. So we would love you here with us every day. Subscribe as watchmen and women on the wall for such a time as this. Number 2, I do want to break down really quick. This is a very, very quick update of some numbers coming out of Israel right now vis-a-vis the war against Hamas jihadists in Gaza. Here's some latest estimates from the war. And again, Israel, remember, has practically full control of northern Gaza, major gains in central and southern Gaza. And it's now target Khan Yunis, the second largest city in the Gaza Strip, where Israel's in the midst of a major offensive there. Okay, here we go. Intelligence estimates, just reading these right off my phone, the hard numbers. Intelligence estimates shared with the U.S. conclude that around 1,200, I'm sorry, that's a point that's coming later. I almost not buried the lead, but buried another story we're going to get into today. I didn't mention UNRWA. You might say, what? The United Nations Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA for short. Members of this UN agency fighting for Hamas and killing Israelis in the name of Hamas. Folks, this is a blockbuster story. And I teased it accidentally there a little bit, but don't worry. By the end of this live stream, we're going to hit on this. The UN at work, U.S. taxpayer dollars. I'm an American, U.S. taxpayer dollars at work. You won't want to miss that story. Please stick around to the end of this live stream to hear about that. But beneath that, I have a few other points here. 3,000 dead Hamas terrorists in Khan Yunis, according to the IDF. That's number one, 3,000 dead. And I heard today, folks, in Israeli media that they believe that half of Hamas's fighters, its terrorist forces in Gaza, have been either killed or injured. Now, I'm hearing estimates of 9,000 Hamas terrorists killed and at least 5,000 or 6,000 wounded. And essentially, they're taken off the battlefield. That's what Israel's saying. Half of Hamas's terrorist forces have been taken off the battlefield. Now, the estimates have been that there's some 30,000 to 40,000 Hamas terrorists, maybe closer to 30,000, half taken off the battlefield since October 7th. I would say that's a pretty big accomplishment, folks. We knew this wouldn't be an overnight operation. This is going to take a while, and Israeli officials confirmed that once again over the weekend that, look, this is going to take a while. But nonetheless, that's a major, major plus to have half of Hamas's forces taken off the battlefield. Big, big victory there for Israel. As I mentioned, 3,000 dead alone in Khan Yunis in the span of this major operation that continues right now. 20 to 40% of all Hamas tunnels damaged or destroyed, according to estimates. That's another big number. So Israel making some major, major gains. Now, look, obviously you'd like to see the number of tunnels destroyed much higher. But considering that Hamas has hundreds of miles worth of these subterranean structures stretching beyond and throughout and beyond underneath the Gaza Strip, again, that's very, very solid, a very solid series of gains by Israel in terms of taking out tunnels and taking out Hamas terrorists. So I know we're hearing some reports in the media, including in the left-leaning Israeli media, doom and gloom reports that, you know, this is a quagmire essentially, and Israel's just not doing what it needs to do, and Israel hasn't made many gains, and Hamas is still alive and kicking. Folks, don't believe the hype, because Israel has made major, major gains and then some in Gaza. It's actually been, considering the amount of Israeli troops killed, I believe it's somewhere around 200 right now, maybe a little over 200, which any death is horrible, especially for a nation as small as Israel and a military that doesn't have, you know, a million-man army, obviously, the IDF, although it's a very, very lethal and effective fighting force. But, folks, there were predictions of thousands of dead Israelis once the invasion of Gaza commenced, and nowhere near that has happened. So I'm definitely someone who sees this as glass half full, to say the least. And I see these negative reports that would lead you to believe that Israel's making no progress, and I have to scratch my head. And we also have reports of the Biden administration really incessantly pressuring Israel to back off, to limit operations, to pull troops out of Gaza. We have Joe Biden apparently saying, oh, wow, this is an election year for me. So this is very inconvenient timing for old Joe as he's running for re-election. He doesn't like that Israel's in the midst of this war and it may pull in other regional actors. Newsflash, it already has. So he doesn't like that, and he's pressuring Israel to back off and, hey, agree to a ceasefire and a prolonged ceasefire at that. And we'll see what happens, folks, because there continues to be rumblings of Israel potentially agreeing to some sort of longer-term ceasefire that would see the hostages, the remaining Israeli hostages, released. Now, remember, there are over, I believe it's 136, somewhere thereabouts. That's a number of Israeli hostages that remain in Hamas captivity. Are they all alive? Sadly, we're not quite sure. We don't know about that, but there continues to be talk of a deal. And Hamas is digging in its heels and saying no deal unless the war ends completely. If Israel calls off the IDF and the war is completely a permanent ceasefire, then we'll release the hostages. That's what Hamas has been saying. So I would hope that Israel clearly and Israel's leadership would not agree to a premature, keyword there, premature ceasefire that would leave Hamas alive to fight another day based on statements by Israeli leaders. I don't think that's going to be the case. And again, Hamas has dug in its heels. They said they're not doing a deal unless the fighting stops altogether. Based on Benjamin Netanyahu's comments, folks, and that of his war cabinet, I just don't see that as a possibility. I think Israel will finish the job here. But I am concerned about the prospect of a prolonged ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire, but say it's a month long, say it's 2 months long. These are some options that have been reported. We just don't know, but fasten your seatbelt because it's going to be a very, very interesting few weeks here. And the Biden administration's pressure, I'll use the word, the pressure on Israel is becoming relentless on Israel to scale back and just holding Israel to completely unrealistic expectations where the Biden administration apparently doesn't expect even one civilian casualty. Now, civilian casualties, folks, are awful. They're a part of war. It's always terrible, no matter where it is in the world, whatever theater of war in the world, it's always terrible. But in Gaza, it's a particular conundrum because Israel is attempting to fight a demonic death cult that willfully and gleefully uses civilians as human shields. Hamas uses men, women, children, the elderly as a central pillar of its war strategy. It stations its rocket launchers in schools and playgrounds and hospitals intentionally, using, again, civilians as human shields. And why does Hamas do that? If Israel is guilty of genocide and violating international law and war crimes, as the International Court of Justice, led by South Africa and its charges would have you believe, if that's the case, then why does Hamas always, and I mean always, station those rocket launchers in civilian areas? Why? Because they know that the IDF will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid any sort of civilian casualties. They know that the IDF won't indiscriminately bomb hospitals and playgrounds and schools. They know that, and that's why they do it. And yet Joe Biden a few weeks ago uses the word indiscriminately in terms of Israel's bombing of Hamas in Gaza. What a disgrace that was. And folks, look, I'm going to Israel very soon. And I will be reporting from on the ground very soon. And I will give you the bird's eye view, the on the ground perspective. And I would have gone already. The only reason I didn't was because I was in the midst of a major move myself with my family. So that delayed me. It put it off a little bit, but I can tell you I will be on the ground very soon. Jerusalem is my second home. The land of Israel is my second home. And it's a gravitational tug on my heart year round. But in particular, in a time like this, I want to stand with Israel in a tangible way as much as I can and be on the ground, shoulder to shoulder with the people of Israel, who I love so dearly. Some of my best friends in the world are Israeli, and these are my brothers and sisters, and I will be on the ground with them, and I can't wait to get there and to bring you some on-the-ground reporting from the land for such a time as this, the most perilous time in Israel's modern history, in my view. Speaking of which, we'll talk about the U.S. and Iran and what's coming there. We'll talk about UNRWA, this UN agency where, folks, literally, this UN agency was employing Hamas terrorists who were involved in the October 7th massacre. You can't make this stuff up. We'll get into that as well before we go, and you will not want to miss that. But up first, we got to talk Iran striking the U.S., Iranian proxies, and we got to talk today Israel striking Iranian advisors south of Damascus. And of course, when we talk Damascus, we're talking prophetic implications. And whenever I mention strikes in or around Damascus, our viewers respond. And our very active chat here, our commenters, they say, Eric, Isaiah 17, it's at the doorstep. And that very, very pertinent verse in the book of Isaiah says that Damascus, a day is coming when Damascus, which is one of the world's oldest inhabited cities, will cease to be a city. The Bible says Damascus. Yes, Damascus, again, one of the world's oldest inhabited cities, will become a ruinous heap. And I quote, that's not me saying it. I'm just quoting the Bible directly. So when we talk Damascus and strikes in and around that city, people get very interested and their prophetic sensors go up. Okay, here's some of the details from today's strike by Israel. And again, Israel will neither confirm nor deny. That's Israel's usual MO. But here are some of the facts straight from the horse's mouth from Syrian state media. And Syrian state media, it's interesting, folks. Remember, this is the media of the Assad regime, which is obviously aligned with the Iranian regime. And they're usually not this forthcoming. But here you go. Syrian state media says a number of Iranian advisors were killed in an Israeli attack south of Damascus in what is a rare acknowledgement by Damascus of Iranian casualties in Israeli strikes on Syrian territory. It also says that civilians were killed, I presume, who were around this building where these Iranian advisors, regime minions, were operating. And Iran's Tasnim news agency reports that, I always laugh, the Zionist regime, that's what it calls Israel, targeted an Iranian advisory center in the area. And apparently 7 people were killed, among them Iranian advisors. Now, folks, will Iran respond directly? That's always the question. But hey, this is becoming almost a daily occurrence, right? If you watch the newscast on a regular basis, we've been reporting that Israel is clearly, and I mean clearly, upping the ante in its strikes against not only the Iranian regime in Syria, but also Hezbollah next door in Lebanon, and Hamas leaders and Islamic Jihad leaders in Gaza and beyond. So Israel clearly right now, folks, look, we're in a new day. October 7th changed everything. And you're seeing Israel, understandably and rightly so, being less restrained. And I don't mean being less restrained in a reckless way. No. I mean things that Israel probably should have done long before October 7th, but was concerned about the international response and concerned about a broader war. That's out the window now. And Israel is saying, we're in a new day. And if we don't act now, this will come back to bite us very, very soon. Exhibit A, October 7th. So we have reports of Iranian regime operatives on the ground in Syria. And I'm paraphrasing their quotes, folks, but these are the reports coming out in media in the region. They said in previous years, Israel would carry out airstrikes in and around Damascus throughout Syria against various Iranian-linked and Hezbollah targets. But now these Iranian sources on the ground say now Israel is shooting to kill in Syria. The frequency has increased of the strikes in Syria, and the lethality has also increased. Israel is fighting for its very existence, ladies and gentlemen. No understatement. So Israel's going for broke here, and they know they're fighting for their very existence. They know that the Iranian regime is making moves. The prophetic chess pieces are moving on the board, and the Iranian regime is increasing its activity. Gaza, of course, but the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, the various militias in Iraq and Syria, and yes, in the West Bank, which we call Judea and Samaria, the biblical heartland. And why do I call it that? Because, well, that's what the Bible calls it. And if it's good enough for the word of God, it's good enough for me. But Iran is upping the ante right now as well. And it's a direct collision course, folks, that we are heading towards. As Israel not only strikes more high-value Iranian targets in Syria in particular, but also taking out high-value and high-ranking Iranian and Hezbollah and Hamas officials and commanders and leaders and top operatives. Again, it's a new day. October 7th changed everything, and Israel has taken off the gloves. Is that the way we could say it? Israel has taken off the gloves in its approach to countering the Iranian regime and its proxies. So the question also has been, conversely, how will the Iranian regime respond? And that's the big question. And We've seen Iran launch attacks, obviously, through Hezbollah. Civilians have been killed along the Lebanon border, Israeli civilians. An Israeli base was struck last week. We reported that here in the newscast as well. So the big question is, how forcefully is Iran prepared to respond to Israel? And by the same token, how forcefully, as we shift a bit, is the Biden administration prepared to respond against Iran? Because at the end of the day, folks, if you missed at the end of the day, the Iranian regime is the head of the snake when it comes to regional terror and global terror for that matter. October 7th does not happen without the active support, training, armaments of the Iranian regime. It doesn't happen. Hezbollah does not exist without the Iranian regime, and there's a good chance that the Houthis at this point wouldn't exist either. This is all leading back to the mullahs in Tehran, the Ayatollah, and that wicked regime, not the Iranian people who are the main victims of this regime, but the regime itself. So it seems to me that eventually the puppet master will need to be struck. And in the wake of, if you missed the top of this newscast, we talked about this drone strike carried out yesterday on a U.S. base along the Jordan-Syria border on the Jordanian side, in which 3 U.S. soldiers were murdered in this Iranian drone attack, and several more soldiers were wounded. This is an escalation by the Iranian regime. How does the Biden administration respond? I put the question out there at the beginning of this newscast, by the way. If you missed any of it, you can just rewind. We'll post the entire newscast afterwards. How does the Biden administration respond? And will there be any sort of meaningful response from this administration? And what is a meaningful response? What do you believe that entails? The consensus, as I glance at our very active chat to the side of my screen here, is they're not going to do anything meaningful. What would be meaningful? What would send a message? Clearly, this begs for a response. It demands a forceful response, and not just strikes against the militias themselves. Folks, we've passed that stage. Since Joe Biden took office in January 2021, we've had well over 100 attacks. Count them. Well over 100 attacks against U.S. soldiers, U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria. Now, I believe it's some 2,500, maybe 3,000 U.S. soldiers still in Iraq, about 900 in Syria. And they have been almost on a daily basis, especially since October 7th, they have been targeted incessantly, relentlessly, and nonstop by the Iranian regime. Now, the Biden administration has responded a handful of times, and I mean a handful, maybe 5, 6 times, and carried out airstrikes along the Syria-Iraq border against these Iranian-backed militias. And they've killed a few. These strikes have killed a few of these Iranian operatives. But at the end of the day, clearly, it has not been anything meaningful enough that would definitively and decisively deter the Iranian regime. How do I know that? Because the attacks continue. And the attacks are actually worsening. Yesterday's attack in Jordan, again, 3 U.S. soldiers murdered in cold blood in this Iranian-backed drone strike. That was the deadliest attack on U.S. soldiers since 2021, since the withdrawal from Afghanistan in August 2021, also brought to you by the Biden administration. And you might say, look, we don't get political. Hey, folks, look, I call it like I see it. If a Republican president was in there, I'd call it the same way. If they were not doing what needs to be done in the foreign policy realm, I don't play that game. I'm going to call it like I see it, no matter who's in office, if I disagree with them. And I think that kind of honesty is why you're here on the channel, because we're going to call it like we see it and criticize when it demands criticism. And in this instance, the responses to Iran have just not been enough. Now, back up a second, because some will say, you're a warmonger and you want war with Iran. No, I don't. I'm not saying that. There's a big, big, big difference between boots on the ground invading Iran, and no one's suggesting that, and surgical strikes that would hurt the Iranian regime, in particular against Islamic Revolutionary Guard's core assets, Iran's elite vanguard, their version of the Nazi SS, but even more powerful and more influential and more prevalent throughout the regime. And what about strikes inside Iran at some kind of sensitive site that would really send a message? That's my point. I'm not calling for an all-out invasion of Iran or an all-out war against Iran. It's not necessary. It's not needed. The U.S. can take steps right now that would fall well short of war or declaration of war, take steps that would send the appropriate and needed message that would deter this regime. But this administration isn't willing to do that. And my concern is that the response is going to be airstrikes along the Iraq-Syria border once again against the militias and not against the puppet master behind the militias. Folks, eventually, and again, we're not calling for an invasion of Iran. It's not needed. If this is done right, it's not needed. You won't need boots on the ground. And no one's calling for that. At least I'm not. I don't know if anyone on Capitol Hill is. At least I'm not. But you get to the point where eventually the puppet master, the head of the snake, needs to be held accountable, right? Because this has been, 45 years now that the Iranian regime has done this kind of thing. And they always have what they consider, I call it implausible deniability, but they say, well, look, it wasn't us. We didn't have it. It was these militias. We can't control the militias. And already the Iranian regime's releasing statements saying exactly that. It wasn't us. Yeah, you funded them, trained them, financially supported them, and directed the attack remotely, but you didn't actually pull the trigger. I mean, that's, folks, eventually, I'm sorry, there needs to be accountability and consequences for that sort of behavior. And if you're Israel, you're saying the same thing, because the Iranian regime is masterminding, engineering Hamas, Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the Iranian ring of fire that we've talked so much about here in the newscast. And look at Yemen. Still, the Houthis are launching rockets and missiles. When I think of just two relatively recent cases of true deterrence established in the Middle East / North Africa, I think of Reagan, President Reagan striking Gaddafi's home, his palace in 1986, message sent. And I think of the elimination of the terror master Qasem Soleimani in January 2020 by the Trump administration. Those are just two I'm throwing out there. But I don't think you're going to see anything like that from this administration in D.C., clearly. And folks, look, if they get it right and they do truly have a meaningful response here that knocks Iran on its heels and sends a message, I'll be the first one to praise them here on the newscast and say, hey, I don't agree with them on much, but on this, they did a good job. But I haven't seen that yet. I haven't seen that vis-a-vis the Houthis and what they've done in the Red Sea, essentially almost shutting down a major waterway. And I have not seen that, certainly not yet, in regards to Iran, Iraq, Syria, U.S. troops being attacked. And folks, by the way, here's a very sad fact. If today the Iranian regime came to the Biden administration and said, we're ready for a deal. We're ready for a new nuclear deal. And we want to do it. We want to deal with you. And let's make this work. The Biden administration would do it in a heartbeat. They would drop everything and they would do it. Folks, the main reason you still have not seen any sort of meaningful response against the Iranian regime, despite the constant and now deadly attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria, despite the constant drumbeat of attacks by the Houthis in the Red Sea, the main reason is the Biden administration does not want to push Iran away forever. Why would they not want to do that? Because they want that deal with the Iranian regime. Even still, even after everything you've seen, even after October 7th and everything I've just laid out, this administration still wants a grand bargain with the Iranian regime. And don't be surprised if they push for that before November 2024, where most of us would see it as an act of complete weakness and craven capitulation and appeasement, the Biden administration would trumpet it and broadcast it as a great foreign policy victory. Look, peace in our time. Where have we heard that before? We shall see. Hey, I want to talk about this UN agency, but real quick, I talked about going on the ground in Israel and standing in the land very soon. You'll know when I'm there. But many are messaging me and commenting and saying, hey, I can't get to Israel, but I want to help somehow. Folks, a great way to do it is supporting our good friends at Meir Panim. You can check them out at mpgive.org. That's mpgive.org. Meir Panim is an incredible Israeli humanitarian organization that is truly doing God's work. They are on the ground. I've been shoulder to shoulder with them. I've worked with them in Israel, feeding, for instance, Holocaust survivors, Israel's neediest, fulfilling that biblical mandate laid out in Genesis 12:3 to bless the people of Israel. They're doing it right now for Israel's most vulnerable. You've got some 80 to 100,000 Israelis evacuated from the Israel-Lebanon border region. Many more evacuated, obviously, from the south along the Gaza border. They're living in shelters. They're living in temporary housing, in hotels. The kids aren't in school. It's a mess, folks. It's traumatic for the people of Israel right now. And Meir Panim is on the ground helping them, blessing them. So help Meir Panim to help Israel's most vulnerable. I believe in this organization. It is mpgive.org. mpgive.org. Check them out. You will not regret it. Okay, as we wrap, as promised, this UN agency, let me just pull this up, by the way. This is why I quoted a little bit. I began to quote it in the beginning of this newscast accidentally. And our good friend Jonathan Schanzer, follow Jonathan on X. Jonathan Schanzer from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies on X, formerly known as Twitter. This is according to Jonathan, and I think this was from, he was quoting a piece. Intelligence estimates shared with the U.S. conclude that around 1,200 of UNRWA's roughly 12,000 employees in Gaza have links to Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Iran-backed terror groups. Folks, this is absolutely astounding. If you missed the top of this newscast, the UN Works and Relief Agency, UNWRA, UNRWA, UN Relief and Works Agency, UNRWA, UNRWA for short. This is a UN agency. It's in Gaza, involved in all sorts of ways. It's essentially in charge of all the humanitarian aid that gets into Gaza. UNRWA is there as kind of the gatekeeper. Well, lo and behold, some 10% of UNRWA employees who get their salary from the United Nations ultimately are involved with terror groups like Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and at least 12 UNRWA employees, it's now being reported, were involved in some form or fashion in the October 7th massacre. Wow. Just when you thought the UN was a beacon of hope and freedom for all and peace and tolerance, or so they'd have you believe, even though the UN has passed more resolutions against Israel than any other nation. Yes, more than communist China, the Soviet Union, Cuba, Iran, Syria, North Korea, the list goes on. More against Israel than all those rogue regimes. Israel, a nation the size of the state of New Jersey, population about 9-10 million with about 7 million Jews. Israel has borne the brunt of the UN's ire to the point where people who are apparently getting a UN paycheck working for UNRWA are taking up arms against Israel. Now, at least 12, and now I'm glad to report on one hand that the United States and other Western nations are they are temporarily suspending until further notice their funding of UNRWA. I presume that U.S. taxpayer dollars went into the funding of this organization. How nice. But they're temporarily, these Western nations, freezing that funding. And the problem with that is President Trump cut the funding altogether during his administration. He was out of office, and the Biden administration aren't you surprised, resumed the funding. And now they're freezing it because they have to do a very thorough investigation. Well, there have been many who reported over the years from the region, many Israeli friends of mine, on the absolute moral bankruptcy of UNRWA. And now it's being exposed for all to see. And we'll see if the U.S. sticks to its guns here, if these European nations stick to their guns here and just end that funding of UNRWA. I believe this organization, folks, should be disbanded. That's what it seems like to me. When 10% of your payroll is actively supporting terror, it seems like you need to disband this organization, this agency, and start something new from the ground up. But we live in times where common sense is not so common. But that's why you come here to the Watchman every day. We're so glad to have you, folks. We're honored to partner with you shoulder to shoulder here. And we ask you to keep praying for the peace of Jerusalem. Prayer works. And we ask you also not to be discouraged, but to remember that God Almighty, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, still, yes, still sits on the throne. He's in control, even though all this madness is unfolding. God is in control, so take heart. Do not be discouraged. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here today on The Watchman. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching.